Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bar Talk, the spirits-based podcast, beverage-based podcast at the Relief and Resource Company in Fenton. We are brought to you, as always, by iLogic Media. If you have not checked out the other content on iLogic, they have a bunch of great shows, some history stuff, a lot of sports stuff. If you're into fantasy sports, it's a great place to get some advice and tips and some good research-based information. So please, if you haven't checked out any of their stuff, please do, because they do a great job by us.
Yeah.
And we are happy to bring you yet another episode. I'm John Foley, the owner of Relief and Resource, joined as always by Mark Miller and Courtney Booms.
Hello.
Yes. So today we are going to speak specifically and generally about Highland Scotch, Highland single malt Scotch, as we're not really touching on blends. That's probably a whole other show.
Yep.
So we are going to talk about some of our favorite drams from the Highlands, a little bit of history on Highlands whiskey, and just generally speak to a spirits category that I think is probably the doorway into Scotch whiskey for most people.
It's kind of like the easy transition out of bourbon, say.
Or Irish, yeah.
Or Irish or Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this is probably if you're just getting into Scotch or want to, this is the section of Scotch whiskey production that I would start with.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of teach you a little bit about it and not hit you over the head with that peat smoke that can be so off-putting to a new Scotch drinker.
Not yet.
So,
Yeah.
Not yet.
Not quite yet. That'll be another episode too.
We'll rip some metal and hardcore music into the Peat Show later.
Shouldn't that just be all we do? Just blare hardcore
We
music?
totally and just drink.
Scream
just
about
drink-
our Irish.
just
or like,
drink
excuse me,
Ardbeg.
our
As
Ardbeg?
long
Yeah.
as it's not copyrighted, so like we can just I'll bring in my amp and my guitar, and we'll just let it feed back in the
Yeah, that's a good
background.
idea. Mark
Well,
just
We'll
stand
get
there.
like a really low bar chord every now and then.
Mhm. Just have that be the
Drone, man.
Yeah.
Drone and Pete.
God. You guys are gonna love that show.
Prepare for that.
All right, but Highland Scotch.
Yep.
And the window into the history, as
Yeah.
always. By Courtney Booms.
Thank you, sir. So a lot of the history of Scotch whiskey is similar to Irish whiskey, so I'll kind of touch on it fairly briefly. It won't be as in-depth for this show. But like Irish whiskey, it originates from aquavitae, so those monastic distillers around 600 AD. It forms its way to Ishkaba or Uskabetha. And then later on, probably around 1400, you start getting those references where beer or wort is being distilled with alembic stills. And it uses heat and condensation to just make a beer that has a higher gravity, basically.
Mhm.
While Ireland,
Because if you can, make it stronger.
yes,
Yeah.
Always.
that is
Especially if you're a drunk monk.
So Ireland and England picked up around the distillation and alembic stills around the same time, but it takes Scotland almost another century to catch up with it. Their vast grain supply and the influence of importance from court-appointed physicians from every Scottish king, starting from Robert the Bruce all the way to Charles I, is how the spirit became a huge part of Scottish culture very quickly initially. So it's got those medicinal roots in Scotland, just as it did in Ireland, but you'll see that it also has a great deal of terroir involved. For those of you who don't remember from the last shows, terroir is a French term used to define the environmental factors that affect a crop's phenotype, or the chemical composition of the environmental context, farming practices, growth habits.
And there is a
things like
big
that.
debate as to whether or not terroir actually exists in Scotch.
I don't see why it wouldn't exist in grains the same way it would exist in.
Well, I think the argument is that after distillation, the particulars are eradicated.
I don't know if I agree with that.
I don't either.
Yeah,
I don't
no,
either.
'cause
But
I
it's
think
got
that-
its proponents. I mean, even the
Yeah.
guy, I think the main distiller from Bruichladdich, which is
Oh, really?
funny, claims that he could see it not existing, which is interesting because Bruichladdich is one of the Scotches that I would probably throw on the table as evidence that terroir exists in Scotland
Absolutely,
before
yeah.
almost any other.
Yeah.
So and you'll never really pin it down, but there is a debate as to whether or not
Interesting.
terroir exists in distilled spirits such as Scotch.
Fair.
Which is very interesting because it's the idea that has always been behind why I like Scotch more than bourbon.
That's
Yeah.
also the reason
Yeah.
why I like Scotch.
Yeah.
Yeah. I at the very least, if it's not the terroir they specifically.
I just wanted to throw it out there and see what you guys thought, but it
Be like
sounds
the
like
types of barley you can grow.
we assert that terroir
Yeah.
exists.
Sounds like we all agree on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe in fairies.
All right, we got that out of the way. We're moving forward.
All
You
right.
believe in fairies?
I do believe in
They're out there somewhere.
Hey, go to Ann Arbor, you see a bunch of them.
Yeah, they're lurking behind everything.
Anyway,
Join us for episode 20 where we expose the fairy conspiracy.
Dun 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 dun.
Grain, spirit, terroir. Early Usquebaugh or Ishkabetha is like super herbal and bitter sometimes, so it's often found in cordials and punches, which I didn't mention in the Irish show, but I brought it back up when I was looking through Scotch, and I think it should be its own podcast as well.
Cordials
the
and
origins of punches.
I'm wearing a seersucker
Whiskey
suit for that
punch.
episode.
Over time, though, whiskey becomes more refined, and it actually becomes a daily life experience for Scottish people, and ingratiates itself into the identity. Like I said, there's a guy, Captain Edmund Burt, who toured Scotland in 1726 and noticed its enthusiastic consumption. He has a quote here: "Some of the Highland gentlemen are more immoderate drinkers of whiskey, even 3 or 4 quarts in a sitting." Dr. Johnson, someone who traveled with him, also
All
said,
those people are dead right after he writes this.
We started the 27 Club. Good Lord.
Another quote from a different gentleman who traveled with him. "A man of the Hebrides, as soon as he appears in the morning, he swallows a glass of whiskey. They're not a drunken race, but no man is so abstemious," I believe is how that's pronounced, "as to refuse the morning dram, which they called a skulk," which is a translation from Gaelic to blow to the head. So a daily dram of Scotch. In certain regions.
I was wondering what the name of our drone metal band would be, but it's
Skulk.
it's the Skulks, obviously.
Your daily blow to the head.
Check that out for our listeners.
In the 1920s, master blenders and distillers, they start to categorize the different regions of Scotch. And so even though Scotch was just kind of its own thing, we now know that it's kind of 5 to 6 main categories. This was just to narrow down the taste of different places and then further distinguish one distillery style from the next one. And so the 5 main regions are Highlands, which we're talking about today, Speyside, Lowlands, Campbellton, Islay, and then I like to include the 6th category, even though the Scotch Whisky Association doesn't count it, and that's islands.
Yeah.
A lot of times islands is looped into Campbellton because they have more closely correlating flavors than say Islay or Highlands.
Yeah, but just to drink Jura versus Talisker is to realize that they can be very, very distinct.
Yeah, and there's even so a lot of times you would classify Highlands as say fruity or floral or light, kind of easy drinkers, which is why at the beginning we said it's really a nice transition Scotch. You'll still get some that are smoky or astringent or outliers. So maybe 80% of each region still fits within this generalized.
Yeah, but as things get, I think you're at a point right now where you are allowed to be more experimental and more signature in terms of what you want to put into the market than you ever have been.
Yeah.
So those lines are blurring,
for
sure. And I think it's creatively interesting that they are.
Yeah.
If every Highland tasted the same, then it would be a pretty boring conversation. Also, back to the islands thing, I think the islands have to be distinct because how could you possibly loop Highland Park into Campbellton when it's all the way the hell up in fucking Orkney, which is
If you want to start a petition, I will join you.
I don't start petitions.
And if you're a newbie to this, I'm sure our fantastic producer Jonathan can throw in a lovely color-coded map of Scotland to show you people. On the video version of
the
it.
gauntlet's down. All right, excellent.
Do we want to go through the regions just very briefly, or do you just want to keep that
Sure,
for each
sure.
kind of? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So we kind of already discussed it. So I'll go in order from northernmost to southernmost. So it's Highlands. Speyside is within the Highlands. Then you have the Islands, Islay, Campbellton, and Lowlands.
Your map is backwards though because you're doing it as if you were looking at
from
it.
this side. Yeah.
Again,
as if I'm
insert
looking at
map here.
Highlands, Speyside,
Yes.
Islands, Islay, Campbellton, Lowlands.
Oh, you're doing that. Okay, got it.
If you're not watching the video version of this, you should be.
Sorry.
Because that was funny.
Yeah, so that wasn't really radio.
So Campbellton is the smallest Scotch region. It's on the south part of the Campbellton Peninsula, as you might guess. It's a natural harbor with ocean water port. So it was once the whiskey capital of the world during the Victorian era. It was producing the most whiskey per square foot.
Really, Campbellton was?
Yeah, it had over 30 distilleries in one harbor.
Wow.
basically.
Such a small space.
Yeah, and then after World
But
War I,
that harbor location, that the water was probably
yes,
a
that's
big part of
exactly it.
it.
Shipping,
Yeah.
accessibility to water.
One of my favorite distilleries is on Campbellton, Glen Scotia.
Oh yeah.
One of my recent
Oh,
favorites.
yes. Is it long rows though.
Well, Springbank.
Springbank,
Yeah.
So it did lose a bunch of its distilleries post World War I. Some say that it's because it was producing quantity over quality. Others say it's just the lack of resources being lost either to the war or just like depleting all of the resources that they had on the peninsula.
Most likely in any of these situations, probably a bit of both.
Probably a bit of both, yeah. Most of the scotches from Campbellton have flavors of brine, dried fruits, vanilla, and toffee. The islands, not a designated region as such as we just discussed earlier. That's like basically everything that excludes Islay and then just kind of hits the coast of Scotland, eastern, northern, and I think there's one or two western.
Skye, Orkney, Jura.
Yeah, so specifically Arran, Jura, the Orkneys, and Skye. They have the larger capacity for having like notes that can hit from fruity and malty to smoky and vegetal. Often if you're getting something from the islands, you're going to get brine, as you might expect, citrus notes, and island air.
Talisker.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
Islay is the best known whiskey region to Scotch drinkers, whether you love it or hate it, because it just blows up with smoke. It's the heavily peated stuff that you're getting for the most part. There are a couple of Isleys that aren't peated or lightly peated.
Whether or not you like it, you've heard of it.
Yeah, for sure. And it is pronounced Islay if you go to Scotland. If you pronounce it Islay or Isla, I don't think anyone's going to hit you over the head, but you might get corrected. That's about it. Yeah. But yeah, brine, vegetal, medicinal, iodine. I still get apples and stuff out of it too.
So
even though it's
you
like
definitely
huge
can,
and kind of bulky in the mouth, you still get.
And they can be silky and malty too. It's just that the one flavor, peat smoke, is so big. It tends to be what almost everybody focuses on.
Lingering
and you neglect to mention the other things. But the really great ones have as much depth of character as anything you could possibly want.
And that's where you get probably one of the best well-known scotches, which is Lagavulin, comes from Islay as well.
Yeah, made very well known through Parks and Rec.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the other regions we've got here is the Lowlands. It's the second biggest region by volume. It has fewer distilleries, but that makes it kind of more distinct usually. Almost exclusively triple distilled, while the other regions typically do double distillation. That provides like a great light body or mouthfeel with plenty of mid-palate sweetness. Notes I got from this one: honeysuckle, cream toffee, toasted nuts, and sweetgrass. So you can get citrusy and baking spice notes there too. And then the last one before we get into the Highlands is Speyside. So that's actually located within the Highlands. It's like a little cutout basically. Triangular shape, and you can almost clarify it the same way that you would clarify Manhattan away from the rest of New York, how it's kind of like its own little identity.
The parallel I always kind of draw in my head is Napa.
Napa wines.
Or Bordeaux. It's just so specific to what it produces that it has to be considered as its own thing.
While the Highlands is the largest area, and then Campbellton used to have the largest distilleries per square footage, Speyside now holds that category. So it has the most distilleries in the one small region.
In the world, or does Kentucky have more? It's got to be close.
That's a great question. I do believe it's Speyside.
I would have guessed Speyside.
Yeah. It's known for fairly smooth, refined whiskeys. It does, so it produces 1/3 of the entire Scotch market, even though it's just that one part. And it includes fruity notes like apples, pears, dried fruits, honey, vanilla, florals, common, as well as cereal notes.
Yeah. I would say Speyside scotches are the most delicate, I think. Yeah. Palate-wise, at least in my opinion.
They, to me, are closer to a Japanese whiskey than the rest of Scotch.
Most of them, I should think. That's what a lot of the Japanese whiskeys were inspired by. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. And a lot of world whiskey too. I mean, the French clearly love Speyside stuff because they make stuff that tastes a lot like it.
Delicate cognacs and things.
Yeah, I believe the French are now the biggest per capita market for Scotch.
Nice.
Yeah.
In the world, which you would never think of, but the French drink themselves an awful lot of single malt.
Good for them. So then, that leads us to the Highlands, which is the largest region by volume. It covers from just north of Glasgow all the way up to Thurstow, which is the northernmost city that has inhabitants instead of just kind of land surrounding it.
Not just Gerard and his sheep.
Or just like a ton of Alps and, and stuff like that. Yeah. So it has a more vast variety of malt flavors coming from that because it is so big. So you can get ranges of like sweetness all the way to like smoky and earthy, kind of like the islands. And the notes for flavors there are fruitcake, malt, heather, oak, dried fruit, and not as extreme as Isla, but often you get smoke in that as well, or peatiness.
Indeed.
Those are the regions.
Outstanding. Thank you.
No, no problem.
Quite good books.
Throwing some distractions her way. She just dodged them.
She's a professional, damn it.
I listen to you, stop, and I go on.
Okay.
Now let's talk about and drink some whiskey. How about that?
Oh, please.
What do you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, where do you want to start? Should we start with? I think
I would start with something that I think is a really great introduction.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to get into Scotch, it can be daunting for a number of reasons: flavor, what you've heard people say about it who don't like it, and cost. Scotch is very expensive. So one of the producers that I love, because it kind of neatly avoids almost all of those things, is Morangie. So with Morangie, they have a range of bottle production that they do, but the 10-year is a single malt that will cost you just north of $40, which is really, really, really affordable. For a 10-year single malt to have that kind of price, an age statement whiskey is great. And its flavors are like and so warm and welcoming and so easy to get into that I think Morangie is like the ideal first dram for somebody who's just starting to get into single malt.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sure. It's a treat yourself kind of whiskey without having to spend as much as you would for a Macallan or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I love the bottle design too. It's just like a really classic, sexy looking bottle, you know, like the label. It's beautiful. Look at it.
You like its curves?
Yeah, it's got great curves.
Do you know that little that's kind of insignia in the center there is inspired by the Hilton of Cadwall Stone, which was located near the distillery. Yeah,
David Blackmore
made in the 8th century.
Told us that story when he was here. Yeah.
Exactly. Thanks, David.
Yeah, thanks, David. Come back anytime.
It's meant to symbolize the interconnectivity of the elements, so fire, earth, and water.
Yeah. And again, like John said, they do different expressions. This is just like their base expression called the original. They also have the Quinta Ruban, which is that's a rum barrel aged one, right?
No, Quinta Ruban is portwood, and that's now a 14-year age statement. It used to be a 12.
Gotcha.
So 10 years for the original, and then 4 years of sherry, Oloroso sherry barrel.
Yeah, yeah.
La Santa is not Oloroso sherry. That's the La Santa.
Yeah.
Quinta Ruban is port. And then La Santa is sherry. Yeah. And then they have the Nectar d'Or, which is aged in Sauterne barrels and is
white wine.
Great dessert whiskey.
Signet as well.
Chocolate malt.
Signet is so interesting. Yeah, that's a great. We're all looking over there because that's where the bottle sits in the barrel.
Super strange to use chocolate malt in a whiskey, have it be as expensive as it was, which was like $120, $130 for the bottle, and then to pull it off, it was pretty remarkable.
Pretty ballsy.
Yeah, and also interestingly enough, Morangie is stronger in the U.S. than it is in Scotland.
Huh.
The original in Scotland is a 80 proof expression, and in America it's 86 proof.
Oh, that's true of some Irish whiskeys as well. You'll get like an 8% difference.
Yeah, David Blackmore, when he was here, I think at one point he mentioned he's like, I love drinking Glenmorangie in America. it's a little bit stronger.
No, I remember going to distilleries and them saying that because they knew we were Americans, so they'd say the thing to everyone else, and then they'd be like, "But for you, it's this," which is awesome.
Because in America, we like it strong.
Or need it strong.
Also that. Need it strong. Yeah.
I know I don't think any of us have it in front of us as far as the pour goes, but I remember writing down some notes I have here is that it's got flavors of orange, guava, passion fruit, toasted hazelnuts, honey, apricot, pears.
Yeah, it's super gentle. Mm-hmm. And if you're at a place that even offers 1 ounce drams, that 1 ounce dram is not going to cost you very much. It's a great thing to go out and try if you think that you want to learn how to like Scotch. It won't cost you that much, and it's very, very easy to like.
I feel like this is one of the bottles where, no matter what bar you go into, they probably have it.
Yeah, and if you don't like Glenmorangie, then maybe you don't like Scotch.
Yeah,
just straight up.
Yep. What should we talk about next?
Can I say one more thing about Glenmoe?
You certainly
switch
can.
on? So they have like super tall stills, which is why they use the giraffe as one of their little kind of mascots as well.
Oh,
They say that the height creates more delicate and fruity esters, and that's one of the reasons why you get so many fruit notes out of them.
I could see that.
I just thought it was a fun fact.
It is a fun fact.
It's
Thanks.
the funnest fact I've heard today so far.
Mhm.
And it's 12:36.
Yeah.
Day fun fact.
What should we do? Fittick's next.
Probably just
'Cause
because
they're
it's another one that's really
namesake.
famous and everybody
Yeah.
knows it. But say it with us now. Glenfiddich.
Glenfiddich.
There's
Yep.
a k at the
Not
end of it.
Glenfiddich.
Yeah.
So like if the r in your mouth when you roll your R sits up here, the it's like right down here in the middle of your throat.
And you have to add the
Yes. Specifically,
It's
I
like
want everyone to
Klingon.
come in and order Glenfiddich.
The Klingons endorse Glenfiddich.
I got so many things I want to say, but I can't. No.
Roll on roller coaster.
Pronunciation's funny.
Yeah, so Glenfiddich, I picked two expressions. They have their main expression
The
is
12
is
is
a
what
12
everybody
year.
knows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next step up from the 12 year is the Glenfiddich 14. This lovely.
The first of
bottle.
two whiskeys that will feature a stag, a very important animal
Yes.
on the
Yes.
on the
Yep,
label
yep.
for Scotland.
But picked these two. Well, the other one I picked too is the Glenfiddich Solera, the 15 year. I picked these two mainly to talk a little
Yeah,
bit
so
about barrel aging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Glenfiddich 14 is so it's first aged in barrels that ex-bourbon barrels, so they're barrels that used to hold bourbon, obviously. But then they do, I believe it's an extra 6 months of aging in new charred American oak casks. So very similar to how you age bourbon in new charred American oak, this Scotch kind of takes on some of those similar qualities that you would get those barrel notes. So I like to really use this as another intro Scotch for
Yeah.
people who really like
For
bourbon,
bourbon drinkers.
but
yeah.
want to try Scotch.
Yeah.
So if that's you, definitely give this guy a try. That's what I'm sipping on right here, actually. And then the 15 year, the Glenfiddich 15, the Solera. Solera we kind of touched on in the rum episode, I
Mhm.
believe. It's basically, in a nutshell, just a style of aging in which you're constantly mixing and blending new spirit with old spirit. And
But
kind
you're
of
never
like-
empty.
But you're never empty. No,
Never
you always
empty.
have the mother spirit in the bottom. It's basically set up like a pyramid style with the new barrels on top, new juice on top, and then the oldest barrels on the bottom, and then they bottle from the bottom barrels. Super elegant, super just. This is probably one of my favorite Highland malts that we have.
It
back
creates huge, like a great amount of consistency in the product as
Yes.
well. So
Yep.
we're finishing, which we
Yep.
also said in the rum
Mhm.
class show.
Yep.
Excuse me, because you want to know what you're going to expect every single time.
Right.
Mhm.
And again, we talked about in the rum episode 2, but age statements. It's always the youngest.
Yes.
Right. So
Liquid
there
that
could
is in
be
the
like
bottle.
20-year-old Glenfiddich in there. Technically.
Certainly.
Right.
Yeah.
Just because it's labeled 15, there could be 20-year-old
15 is
whiskey.
the youngest thing they put in there.
Yep. But yeah, both fantastic whiskeys if you want to kind of experience ways in which barrel aging can affect the spirit, for sure.
It
That's-
is. Oh, sorry.
Hit it. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say it is one that some people might contest as a Highlands because it's technically located in Speyside, but marketed as a Highland Scotch.
Yes.
And I think going back to, what we've talked about before and what we're talking about now. I'm sorry.
Hits more Highland notes. Sorry.
Oh yeah, style-wise, taste-wise, yeah, for sure. The barrel, I don't think you can really overstate barrel influence in Scotch because depending on how you finish it, you create whiskeys that have variant different flavor notes, which also is a reason why I tend to prefer Scotch to bourbon because as much as I love bourbon, every single barrel is newly charged, so that flavor will be ubiquitous.
Right.
And with Scotch, you start with that same barrel basically, but spent already. So you have a baseline, and then you can do all, what we're talking about. You can do Solera method, you can do bourbon cask, you can do rum finishing, or do
blends.
none of it.
Yeah.
And each bottle is so unique. And that's not to say that bourbon barrels aren't unique either, but that one flavor will always be a current line running through it.
Right. Yeah.
Which is why people like bourbon so much. But I find it, bourbon people, no matter how I say this, I'm going to get in trouble from some bourbon person, but I find Scotch to be a slightly more interesting conversation.
Yeah. And I almost think when it comes to
I said what I
bourbon,
said.
Complex. Yeah.
I almost think when it comes to bourbon that the mash bill is more important than the barrel. You know,
So for
Not
some,
to
some
bourbons,
people.
for some
not that the
bourbons,
barrel is
yeah.
unimportant, but yeah,
It has maybe more rules and regulations regarding the
Yeah.
mash bill versus the barrel aging.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's why you see trends in bourbon where you're trying to stretch that barrel or expand upon that idea. You see them doing what the Scotch do and secondary barrel finishing,
Yeah.
or you see them pushing the char level to try to like push beyond that, because that newly charred barrel has been such a ubiquitous thing within the bourbon community.
Yeah.
But now that envelope, I think for some is getting a little bit tight.
Yeah.
And they're just starting to push against the walls of it.
That's like when we got that Parker, was it Parker's Heritage, the heavy char?
Yeah.
I was really impressed by that.
That stuff is
It's like-
awesome.
it's a bourbon, but like you can see how that difference in the char on the barrel affected it so greatly.
Mhm.
So like a level,
I think it was
like
a level
10 or 11.
I thought it was
No, it was like 5 or 6.
5 or 6. Yeah.
Okay.
Just 3 or 4 is what most people are at.
Right, yeah.
And Ardbeg did it too.
Good job.
Scorch.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Did you say good job?
Good job,
Yeah,
Ardbeg.
Good
job,
job,
Ardbeg.
Ardbeg.
You got this.
It's a good job, Ardbeg portion of our show, which is funny
Which we
because
should
we've
always
actually
have.
yet to do a show on Ardbeg.
I
but
know,
we just
yeah.
mentioned it
It's
every
coming.
show.
It's coming.
Yeah, it is. Okay, moving on. Let's stay malty and sweet. Yeah, exactly. That's just what I was going to
Yeah,
suggest
well,
we do.
Because I kind of wanted to talk about it because you brought up the stag. So with the Dalmore in particular, it has the stag logo, but it's always going to have 12 points on it, and it comes from like its oldest story that they like to tell.
The Clan Mackenzie.
Clan Mackenzie in
Yeah.
1263. I'm going to drop the accent because I could carry it on, but I don't want
Oh,
anyone to call me
please
out on
do.
it. So their
Highland
logo
accents.
emerges from the chief of Clan Mackenzie. He saved King Alexander III from being attacked by a furious stag, and they gave him the stag for his coat of arms as an emblem. And then later, descendants bought the Dalmore distillery in 1867 and started using it as the image on their bottles.
Just happened to be right where the stag was charging and the king was to save him. Or did he
Convenient.
release the stag himself?
Dun, 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 dun,
Scotch-based cold cases next
Dun.
episode.
So the 12 points is significant because any stag with 12 points or greater was reserved for the king, they said. So like if you hunted a stag with 13 points, you'd get like taxed or thrown in jail or something like that because they were only the king stags. But Dalmore was given that one because of that story. They like to hype a thing called the Gonzalez bypass in particular. So they have one sherry house that only gives their barrels to Dalmore, and they use I think it's pronounced Matsulum sherry, which is a type of Oloroso sherry aged in Pedro Jimenez barrels.
Let's see that.
Oh no, that's Matsulum. Sorry, Matsulum.
Matsulum, yeah.
Matsulum. So it gives a lot of chocolate and orange characters in particular, so rich and nutty notes as well. And I definitely find that whenever I drink Dalmore, I've got super huge orange and then like light chocolate or caramel. Sometimes it comes.
Dalmore is a. I hesitate to call it gentle because it's very, very complex, but it is a rich and welcoming whiskey.
Absolutely.
Super nice. Another one like Glenmoe where it's very desserty to me. Like if
Yeah,
someone likes
right.
sweet palate stuff, I would totally throw these their way.
Which makes it another very attractive whiskey for bourbon drinkers because along with new barrel char, flavors, and along with sweeter corn, what a lot of bourbon drinkers also like is mouthfeel, like heavy mouthfeel. And that's what bourbon accomplishes. And Dalmore does that almost as good or better than any other Scotch on the market. And I saw this when I used to, be more involved with wine. It wasn't always the grape Cabernet that people liked. It was the oakiness and the mouthfeel. So, you go show somebody some Syrah from the Rhone Valley that they had never had before. And they was like, oh, I thought I only liked Cab. No, you just like big mouthfeel wines. Yeah. And bourbon drinkers like heavy mouthfeel, and I think that Dalmore is definitely one you should check out.
They're also famous. It's owned by White and McKay, who own like Jura and Shackleton, which we carry back here as well. And they're famous for bottling some of the most expensive Scotch that's been ever sold. So they include
5-figure stuff, yeah.
Yeah, a 62-year-old Dalmore that sold for $48,000 each bottle. And then in 2010, they had bottles of Dalmore Trinitas.
Is that the one that was bottled from stuff like from the 1890s?
Yeah.
They made like 12 bottles of it.
Yes, it was very exclusive.
Yeah.
They said the first few bottles sold for $150,000, and then a couple years later, I think the last bottle was sold for $180,000, which is insane.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot.
that sell them.
Watch
now.
one of the bottles was bought by that D-bag who also had that Wu-Tang album.
Possible.
Martin, whatever his name is. He had to sell that one too. So Dalmore expressions include a 12, a 15, an 18, a 24, a port finish, which is non-age statement, and the cigar malt, which is probably, even though it's more expensive, probably the Dalmore that we drop the most on the bar.
Honestly,
because
yeah.
people love the cigar malt.
Just for, I mean, Bo and Cohen alone.
It's a status. It's a status whiskey, but it's also, I mean,
Yeah.
it is that richness and that opulence to it that I think is like hedonism from Compass Box. It's a treat yourself whiskey.
Super treat yourself.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was about to say.
I'm realizing we forgot to grab a bottle off the back bar, so you guys riff for a second. I'll be right back.
Riff. All right. Do you want to talk about Oban a little bit?
I just want to talk about how Mark's not here.
Mark.
Yeah.
Ah,
It's not just that he's not here,
Yeah.
it's that I miss him.
good job thinking of the bottle before versus after.
We are going to talk about Oban.
Oh,
So
yeah.
Oban is the northernmost distillery in the Highlands.
Right.
The northernmost distillery in Scotland that's not Highland Park. They make a 14-year expression, which is what most people know. This is another one that is often mispronounced. It's Oban, not Oban, which I did probably up until about 10 years ago.
Well, you guys already, during the Women in Whiskey one, saw how badly I pronounce Glenmo on average, so I'm just going to start calling it Glenmo from now on.
Glenmo's easier.
A lot of people call it that, yeah.
Yeah.
This one, I'm not going to touch too much on the history of it, but just for me personally, it's kind of near and dear to my heart because
So good.
along with Glenlivet, this was the Scotch that made me like Scotch that I tried probably, I want to say almost 19 years ago when I was working one of my first bar jobs in Kalamazoo, and I just turned 21, and I just wanted to know about Scotch, and there's like 3 Scotches on the back bar of this place, and all of them were super dusty. Like literally nobody ever came in there to drink Scotch, and consequently it was way cheaper than it should have been. So I was able to try it and kind of like challenged and fascinated at the same time when I first took my sip of Oban. And I think what I liked about it then and what I like about it now is it's totally got a little bit of everything. It's got power, it's got richness, it's got a hint of smoke and terroir and graininess. And it just really touches a lot of flavor bases for me.
So I took some of this home last night before filming this and tried it, and the first thing I got was saltwater taffy and like a bubblegummy sweetness on the nose, which was insane. And then after trying it, I got baked peaches, like a peach cobbler with like vanilla ice cream kind of vibe.
Geographically in a
White
cove,
chocolate
yes.
creaminess.
In like
Yes.
a bay.
Yeah.
Cove.
So
It's way up on this like
literally, Oban is translated from Gaelic is little bay. And they do have an expression called
Little Bay,
Oban
yeah.
Little Bay, so it's like Little Bay technically, or
Yeah.
ATM machine kind of vibe.
yeah, that's a non-age statement whiskey.
It was operated by Hugh and John Stevenson, opened in 1794, named after the town that it's located in, so Little Bay again. Changed hand a few times, was once owned by Doors, and is currently owned by the whiskey giant Diageo.
Mm-hmm.
That's one I have not revisited in a while, and it's
so good.
real good.
See, I'll get this one on occasion. Like this is
Yeah.
kind of one of my go-tos, and
Yeah.
I just love it.
It's so silky.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly the mouthfeel. Like I got
Yeah.
like the way that chocolate, when you just let it sit in your mouth, and it, like it
Yes.
gets really like soft and malleable.
It's funny
Smells like
because
white
it's a
wine.
whiskey that, because it's owned by Diageo, has a presence on a lot of back bars. So you see it often,
Mhm.
and you forget about it, but it is consistently excellent. And you taste other things like, I'm really into Bruichladdich, I'm really into Ardbeg, I'm really into Balvenie, but you come back to Oban and it always crushes it.
Yeah, it's like vanilla, peaches and cream.
Yeah,
just like
peaches and cream for sure.
Yeah,
silky smooth.
Really,
and you
it's
can
owned-
absolutely find it almost everywhere.
Really,
too.
it's owned by Diageo, so like a huge brand, but it actually only has 2 stills, so it's one of the smallest like distilleries in Scotland. And also a fun fact, it was very important during
John-
the Cold War because the
John
first
Cole goes, "Bing," fun fact.
fun fact,
Fun fact.
the first transatlantic telephone cable came ashore at the Galanack Bay and carried through Oban. It was the hotline between U.S. presidents and USSR general secretaries.
Wow.
Bang
Fun fact.
you with his own.
Yep.
You can
Lighter,
use that
drier,
if you want.
smoky,
It's
smoky.
trademarked by the Beatles. We
It
don't need
is.
them
It's
coming
great
after us.
So moving on from Oban.
Did you guys ever see, just quick side note, I can't remember what show it was, but it was like the guy was going in to try to license a Beatles song, and He's like, so what can I get? He's like talking to the lady. She's like, what can I get for like $100? And she takes an apple off her desk. She's like, you can have this apple. He's not like not like back in the USSR, like, hey Jude. She's like, no, that would cost you about $5 million. He's like, so there's no chance.
I don't know if that's actually in the TV show or you just made it up.
No, it is. I just can't remember what TV show it is. I think it was a God, what is the name of it? It's that sketch comedy show with
like Kids in the Hall or something.
I'm gonna think of it.
Prolonged digression.
Yes.
Okay, that's what it's called. Outstanding.
Do you want to talk about the bottle you ran away for?
Oh yes. So we're gonna try to start this new segment in our podcast called Obscure but Awesome. And being that we're talking about Highland Scotch, figured we'd talk about Glenfiddich, Fire, and Kane for a little bit. So this one is interesting because not only is it a peated expression from Glenfiddich, but it's also rum barrel aged, correct? Yeah. I don't have a whole lot to say about this other than the fact that it is phenomenal and probably, I mean, out of the entire Glenfiddich line, I know I said I love the Solera, but this stuff is rowdy just because I'm very fond of the peated whiskeys as well. So
Yeah, but that rum finish offers it quite a bit of balance when it comes to malt and richness too.
One thing too, I don't know why, but some people will come and ask me if that's like their cinnamon whiskey, if it's like the Glenfiddich equivalent of Fireball. It is not.
It is not.
It's
no,
not.
Sorry to disappoint.
And that's why I think some people involved with it were like, that's what we're going to call it, really? Because the word fire on a label now is just like, instant association with cinnamon. But it's funny because it's almost, to a malty whiskey drinker, it'll taste super peaty. To a peated whiskey drinker, it'll taste super malty.
Yeah.
And we'll run you south of $50 for a bottle, or just right around $50 for a bottle, maybe south of 60.
I think I saw it at Wigville for like 45.
There you go. So very, very affordable too.
And it tastes, you get the rum sweetness up front, but then the smoke on it it's not like peat like you would get in like Lafroig or Ardbeg. It's very like campfire.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Really
So
lovely
just like
whiskey.
just drink this instead of Fireball. It's not like Fireball, but drink it instead of Fireball.
It's not like Fireball at all, which is why it's
great tailgate whiskey.
yeah, absolutely.
Interesting point.
Sorry,
No, I just it
says-
popped into my head and be like, yeah, the next tailgate I go to.
you don't
totally
go to
bring
tailgates,
that.
but I do, and I would drink this at a tailgate.
I would drink outside in the bed of a pickup truck though. Just to be fair. You guys want to talk about Kleinleash?
Yeah,
Certainly.
So Kleinleash did get its own video.
way back in the day.
In the day when John and some staff members were filming just reviews of
Yeah, we were
specific
doing whiskey
whiskeys.
reviews, which kind of evolved into this podcast.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Kind of like got carried into it. So
Yeah.
it's not unfamiliar for anyone who's been following since a couple years ago. But Kleinleash is Scots Gaelic for sloped garden or pasture. The original location of the distillery was in the Sunderland region, where we had talked about with Dalmore and the Women in Whiskey series that a lot of the farmers there got relocated. That was called the clearances in the early 1800s.
What a nice term for
beginning
it.
of the 9th series.
Yeah.
19th century, excuse me. So the Duke of Sunderland, he evicted all these people and he sent them into these cities where the whole towns had businesses built from him, so that he owned them. And the farmers, he'd employ them there at the businesses, right? Because they lost their homes or whatever. But then they had to pay rent, and the only payment that they ever received were tokens that the farmers could use at this guy's own businesses. So if anyone's familiar with American history, you might find there's a correlation with certain indentured servitude practices as well. So not a great guy, but he did create.
Was that the first cryptocurrency then?
Crypto? I don't think they had any type of phones or electronic.
But they were
online
still
stuff.
mining it.
They were mining the crap out of it.
True.
Yeah.
So he created businesses in the town of Brora, Brora, and that's where the distillery was founded itself.
Very famous lost distillery.
Yes.
Brora.
Yeah. I was
So-
about to say that, yeah.
Yes.
If you
and-
find any Brora stuff, it's going to be very expensive, but
Yes.
well worth drinking, because I actually have had a pour of an ancient Brora before.
Yeah.
I believe it was at Ashley's in Ann Arbor. They have a lost distillery series of drams that you can get.
Yes, I believe you texted me gloating about it.
I did. I did.
Unsurprising move.
He's like, you bastard.
Yeah.
So by 1912, it was owned by John Risk. He worked with DCL, Distillers Company Limited, which eventually became Diageo. So in 1925, it gets absorbed into Diageo and is still under them today. In 1968 is when the new plant was built with 6 stills. So the old plant, Clynelish A, you might say, was turned into Brora, and then Clynelish B is the one that still produces this today. It was originally, they just called them both Clynelish, but the Scottish Distillers Association, Whiskey Association, was like not into it.
Yeah.
So they renamed it Brora, and then it did close down in 1930. Reopened in 1930 until 1960. From 1968, until 1983.
80s were a dark time for Scotch.
Yeah, Brora produced, so
They
it
had a
stopped then.
Thanks,
rough go.
vodka.
Yeah.
But it's like Pappy trying to find Brora. Like, big Scotch heads are super into it, but it's super hard to come by, very expensive.
Brora, Port Ellen, Lady Byrne, like all those are really, really difficult and highly sought after if you're into Scotch.
I was under the impression that Brora reopened in 2017.
I don't know if anything's in the market yet. So
they're not
Brora has
producing yet,
reopened.
but they are like aging.
Yeah, there's gonna be stuff
Probably
from
a couple more
Brora.
years.
So
they'll
you
put out like a
can't find it,
10-year expression.
but you
Yeah.
will find it.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yes,
Yeah.
hopefully.
And Clynelish also, 95% of its make goes into the Johnny Walker Gold Label series.
Yes.
And Gold is a great whiskey.
Gold is
My-
fantastic.
Probably my
whiskey.
second favorite of the Johnny Walker whiskeys after
Yeah.
Green.
Green is where it's at. Yeah.
So it's got like lots of honey and honeysuckle, sweetgrass and caramel, butterscotch. Japanese whiskey lovers would love this one for sure. Light mouthfeel too.
Clynelish has a little bit of power and graininess on the finish too, which I very much find attractive.
And like a light smoke as well.
Mhm.
It's not heavily peated, but slightly smoked.
Portlandia. That's the name of the show I was trying to think of.
How could you not think of that, Mark?
I don't know.
He was not gonna let this podcast end.
No, I had to. Yeah, so that sketch I was talking about is in Portlandia.
Outstanding. That I think wraps up what we've got here on the table. I think
Yeah.
We didn't really pull a Balvenie, although we all really, really admire Balvenie.
Yeah.
Also owned by William Grant, who owns Glenfiddich, and Aberlour probably deserves a mention because we really like Aberlour. Although those are specifically Speyside, so that's why we didn't do it.
Yeah.
Well, they're great.
Yeah.
I will say, if I can just jump like 2 cents onto Glengoyne, which is another Highlands malt. They use, they're one of the only distilleries that uses Golden Promise barley, which is like super hard to grow, very rare. It's also used in Macallan and Balcones. Yeah, so it creates
time
like
is
a
it?
really lovely, rich.
What time on the podcast is it?
42:34.
Incredible.
We were going to try to, I was
Distillery.
secretly waiting to see how long it would take for us to actually mention Macallan or whether or not we could do
Oh.
a Highlands show without saying Macallan.
Well, we went almost
Well, it's
45
not
minutes.
Highlands,
close.
it's a Speyside.
I know, but I knew it was going to get
Yeah.
referenced.
Anyway, it's a cool distillery too because they're the distillery facility is in the Highlands, but they have an aging warehouse in the Lowlands, so they literally ride the line between
Mhm.
Highlands and Lowlands,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really nice.
Another great introductory whiskey.
slow fermentation, complex esters developed from that.
Mhm. My brother-in-law, who's recently in the last few years really gotten into Scotch. This was his
Loves
kind of
Glengoyne.
introduction to single malt was Glengoyne.
Yeah.
And
that's
then he started
fantastic
tasting
Scotch,
barrel
too,
proof
so I didn't
stuff,
wanna leave
and he's
that
like,
out.
"Here we go."
Big Glen Scotia fan.
Yeah, it's interesting now that we brought it up. We did not pull any bottles of Macallan, probably because
It's a Speyside.
Speyside.
Yeah.
well that I mean Speyside still being in the Highlands, yes.
Yeah, with him.
But I feel like I think it's good that we kind of sought out other, I don't want to say more interesting whiskeys because I think Macallan is a great expression of what that type of whiskey can be. But I think there's lots of other bottles that are less popular that,
Well, yeah, and when we get to
True.
the Speyside show, it's going to be impossible not to talk about
Right,
Macallan
right.
because Macallan is Speyside
Yeah.
for most people,
Yep.
and Glenlivet.
Yeah.
And those are Speyside
But
for so many people.
Yeah, so is like Aberlour and other really great Speysides
Yeah,
that
exactly.
sometimes
oh, I'm so
get
excited
the
to
pass
talk
because
about
of it.
barrel proof Aberlour.
Yeah, but Nalba.
Yeah, but I think this wraps up our
Yes,
Highland show.
I think it certainly does.
Hopefully, you got some drams that you want to try, and maybe it kind of spurs you towards giving Scotch a try if you haven't tried it yet. It's not all scary, and it's not all peaty, and it's not all aggressive, and is I mean, it's also a little lower proof for the most part than bourbon, and that's not necessarily something that everybody wants to hear, but it's kind of nice if you want an extra dram.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Brought up in
Yeah.
that first episode, or not the first episode. One of the episodes where it's like, what do you do when you go to a bar to just be chill? Is that episode 2?
yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that you don't always need cask strength. Sometimes those lower gravities help you
Mhm.
keep the night going.
I know we don't normally do it, but we can kind of tease the next episode, which is going to be a super fun one.
It will include cask strength.
It will include some very high proof whiskey and some very hot chicken wings.
Did you notice that John's sitting here kind of like holding his face?
And
the two of us
someone-
are
You know
smiling
what?
real big.
You guys go ahead and do whatever you want next week, because I will have my turn. And I'm going first because I'm going to like the revenge portion of it better than I like the actual episode.
The moral of the story is John's going to be in a lot of pain, and it'll be fun for me and Courtney.
So you just get to watch and laugh.
So with that being said,
Fire up.
yeah, I think we
Ready
can
for
end it
it.
there.
All right. Cheers, everybody. Thank you for joining us again, and we'll see you on the flip.
Yep. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Food.